The Collaborating Conversation podcast is for avid book readers, book lovers, and authors. Listen to this podcast as we talk more about the art of writing, stories behind books, and the hands that created them. So stay tuned and enjoy our show.
Welcome to the Collaborating Conversations podcast. Today's episode is part one of the Foundra Series deep dive by author Emmanuel M Arriaga.
Hello, and I think we're live.
All right.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have some good news. What happened for the, was it this week or last week?
It was end of last week.
All right. So end
of last week, my audiobook dropped.
Woo! Now, this is the redo version of the first book, correct? Or is it the second book?
It's the first book, the redo of the first book. Yeah, the second edition.
Okay. So you did make some changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's mainly if anything, was the removal of some content that didn't necessarily add fully to the story. So it's just a cleaner, no significant changes. Like the core of the story is the same. No significant events have been removed. It's more just there were some areas where the prose could have been a little tighter.
Prose? What do you mean by prose? I'm not familiar with that term. Just
the writing, when people say the prose, it's just like how something is explained or written. So the flow typically. Okay. So like the flow is cleaned up a little bit in some areas. Usually it's just like a few wording choice changes or removal of some content, with an eye towards increasing clarity or, removing things that don't add to the story. And so for mine, it was mainly around removing things that didn't add to the story and just, having a second editor go through and just look at it from a fresh set of eyes. Mm. But
are we giving a spoiler warning, or are we going to try to stay spoiler free tonight?
I mean, the book's been out for a while, so it's like...
Well, hey, not everyone listening to our podcast is going to read the book, so I think this is the official spoiler warning. If you have not read The Rift War, is this and what's the first book subtitle? Or
it's just Foundra. Okay. That was another thing. I removed the Rift War caption, so it's not Foundra the Rift War. It's just Foundra. Foundra, book one of the Foundra series, and so it was just kind of going with a cleaner title. I remember back when I first launched the Rift War, there's actually another series called the Rift War.
Oh, whoops.
It's the Rift War Saga. And so there's a lot of confusion to whether it was related to that or if it was a knockoff of that. And it was, the Rift War Saga is like this fantasy series that has nothing to do with sci-fi or, anything related to my book, not even comparable, right? And so, part of it was getting rid of that confusion, the things that you have, you don't have access to as a self-published author, like a brand strategist type of stuff that you kind of learn after the fact.
For example, or what do you mean by that?
No, just like conflicting titles or brand confusion. Normally you'd have a brand strategist who would look out at the market and come up with the branding.
You're essentially self-published, right?
Yeah. Which means I just have to pay for everything myself. So I think it was going with a cleaner title. The Rift War is still referenced in the second novel, but it's more so an event. Because the war in the first novel is still referred to as the Rift War. Because these
just to clarify, the first book and second book the second book was released, but it hasn't had the second audio book. So the first book has audio and EPUB or Kindle, and the second book is just Kindle currently, correct?
Yeah, it was Kindle and print.
Okay.
So Kindle and print for the first and the second, and then there's also an audiobook for the first.
Okay.
It was it was just kind of looking at the book with a fresh set of eyes, both for the editor and for myself, because I actually went through and did a pass through the book and,
Because when did you first release it?
2015.
Okay.
So a long time ago.
Oh, you released it before we moved out. So before I met you then.
Yeah, I had been published for a while before then. And the audiobook, I think the audiobook had come out shortly after I moved to the Bay Area. Yeah, I think that's right. The audiobook was released before I moved out here because it launched in July of 2016. But yeah, so it was just a second edition. It's something that's actually, a lot of books do second editions, third editions. A lot of times they just don't announce them.
They just revisit.
Or they don't change. A lot of times they'll change the cover. So like if you ever go out on Amazon and you look at a book and that book has been around for a while and it has like 4 or 5 different covers that, all the old covers are no longer available. It's usually an indication that they have done another edition.
That's good to know. A little industry secret there.
Yeah, and a lot of times authors will go and they'll do continuity changes.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, as you progress a series, especially a series that's been along for a long time, you'll go down a path where you couldn't mess with continuity, And so a lot of times when authors do this, because it makes sense for the series or it makes sense for, these different things, it ends up being needed for them to go back and update the initial draft just to either add, language or remove language for whatever the continuity changes.
For example, if you make a character like change a belief system later on or something, like kind of signal that he's questioning that earlier in the book or something.
Sometimes it's not that as much as it is, like, oh, these characters are related, and it's just like, you never, earlier in the book, you're just like, oh, they came from 2 different families,
Okay.
But then later on, you're just like, oh, they're actually brother and sister. And then you're just like, oh.
That seems like a big change.
Yeah, a lot. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of times, something just, I didn't really have, there was one continuity change, and it had to do with Amaria in the first book and in the second book, because she has a story arc in the second book. And, in the second book, like there was this really big, important scene between them. And it made a lot more sense if they had a lot more history than I originally mentioned that they had, so it went from being, them having a fling to them actually having been married. And so, I was able to explore that further with them, as a divorced couple in the second book, and, having a bitter relationship versus, just a regret that Lenret had in the first book. And so that actually, was a pivotal part of the narrative that ended up affecting Nevin in the second book. That's a simple continuity change because it's like, it literally like reworked like one sentence. But
yeah, I wouldn't have think about one sentence makes that much of a difference, but dang.
Yeah, I think that was the only major thing. But yeah, it was, now I'm doing an audiobook tour with a blog tour. It's coming up April 15th, where I'm working with this one site where they coordinate blog tours across the
blog tour. That's something I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I did something similar for the release of Pride of Ashna. So a blog tour is when you basically, it's usually to support the release of a new novel or an audiobook, and you coordinate the release with a number of book bloggers or audiobook bloggers in this case, and they prep a lot of content ahead of time. So like you do author interviews, share details about the creative process, about the book, and so I'm in the process of putting together a lot of content for the scheduler, and she's basically provides each blog with a set of materials that they then go and prepare to support the launch, and it drives traffic to their site, and it's a way to get people to review the book and also to get people to
so similar like to a tech review, right? Like MKBHD, like he gets phones and stuff ahead of time so he can kind of get his reviews up and running, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a similar process. except those are more for like tech products versus like a book. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. It's a different genre of marketing, kind of, right? Like, I'm assuming are there a lot of book reviewers? I know I've thought about.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of them, and so usually the tour guides end up having a set of blogs that they primarily work with. They have relationships with.
I'm assuming it's kind of one of those. Here's a copy of the book. Here's a review. Let me know what you think, type of thing. Feedback and review.
Yeah, although they don't necessarily have to do that. A lot of times they might just be they might just want to host the book and provide like an author interview or something like that. And so it's a way to just, reach people who you might not have considered part of your, sales demographic or people you didn't have a reach into before that, you can get with doing something like a blog tour. So yeah, I learned about them when I hired a book marketer for the release of Pride of Ashna, because I actually had someone draw up a book marketing strategy for me. And when they did that, it was essentially a way to, but the blog tours was a part of that.
Did you, so the first book is just Foundra and the second book is Foundra Pride of Ashna. Is that correct?
It's just Pride of Ashna for the second one.
Okay.
So Foundra is the series tagline now.
Okay.
So the first book is Foundra, and the series name is the Foundra Series.
Okay.
And so every book that's relaunched after, will just have the series tagline. So it'll say like the title of the book, and then underneath of that title it says Foundra Series.
Okay.
And then what book number it is.
That's a complete switch, because obviously I got full disclosure here. Emmanuel did give me a copy of the book, and I needed to do a review for that. However, I did enjoy the book. It was a ton of fun. So I'm still thinking, just because I haven't kept up with all the changes, Foundra the Rift War. That's how I remember, and I liked it because at least after reading the book, I thought that was a really cool, like, the Foundra Rift War series was getting, like, from what I've read and just the way, where I can see the world building and what direction you're going. I can see that cool, but apparently that had to change, especially due to copyright or other titles and confusion that could happen. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much worried about copyright as it was just creating a different, unique brand.
I was going to say, did you do any SOE search and kind of figure out what kind of names and what things worked best, or was that part of the figuring out the brand?
Well, you're limited to some extent because it's already a launched book, so you can't do a drastic brand change. But it was more effective to remove the Rift War branding, even though the war is still referred to as the Rift War in the book,
right,
or in subsequent books. But it was important to remove that branding for the first book in order to make it more unique and have it stand on its own better. So
yeah, and that was due to market research, just determining that would be the best option.
Yeah, it was based off of research and understanding of how things were received in the review community and stuff like that. Because whenever I would market it, people would go like, what is this, a knockoff the Rift War Saga? And it's just like, no, I didn't even know the Rift War Saga existed.
Did that kind of provide a lot of negative feedback? Because people are like, why would you copy? Like, kind of like if you're copying something that kind of it's looked down upon.
Yeah, it's more so, people always assume. So it's important to assume good intent as a way to kind of eliminate those critiques.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and one of the things I've done is I redid my website.
Ooh.
I changed and this was actually due to feedback from my so just to talk to this side, I guess. So at the main landing page, there's this video running in the background for the top banner. So there's no audio. So it's like it's an embed with a buy on Amazon button superimposed in the video. So I borrowed this concept from a lot of award-winning authors who, have catchy graphics at the top. And I also focused the front page around selling. So like before, my front page used to just be around like introducing people to content But now it's like, you get to the landing page and it's just like, here's the new thing, with an ability to buy. Here's all the books that I've published. Here's new merch that's for sale. And then I get into content. So like, here's the blog posts, short stories, and then sign up for the newsletter. And so before it was mainly like, here's a bunch of blogs. Here's the new book that released. And then, here's short stories, and then the newsletter, and then social media stuff. Mm-hmm. And it, at the time, like it sounded like a good idea, but when I went and looked at other competitors' websites, like they very much focused on selling right out the gate and using their website as a drop off point for pushing people to buy their stuff. And so, just kind of rechanged this. Still have a link to the merch store at the top. So for each book I did a landing page, which is something that I played around with this concept before, but my social media team, I had a conversation with them this year around like really focusing on selling, and actually gave me feedback and said like, hey, it's better if we're able to point marketing to a landing page on your website versus directly on Amazon, because, we're able to better track metrics and things like that, and conversions. And so, I took the feedback to heart and went back. I originally had some pages, but I actually went and created like a, holistic experience for each one. So every book I have has a book trailer, and then have the cover of the book along with the marketing text description for,
is that marketing description the same as what would be on the back?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is also the same that's on Amazon. And then any recognition it's received. So Foundra was the National Indie Excellence Award Finalist, science fiction, and then Reader's Favorite Book Award Finalist for Sci-fi Romance. Ooh. Which I was surprised, actually.
There were spicy scenes in the book for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely viewed it as a core part of the narrative as being this romance novel between Nevin and Zun, and, Zun, primarily focusing on Zun from the perspective of, her dealing with this traumatic loss at the beginning of the book, mm-hmm. and going through the healing process throughout the book, kind of rediscovering herself, and then, rediscovering new love with Nevin. And then this narrative with Nevin, just kind of struggling with, being in a relationship, and being in a serious relationship for the first time. And so it was there was a lot of undertones of a romantic, story there, but to have it actually formally recognized, as almost being an award winner, being a finalist, for sci-fi romance, I was just like, oh, wow.
Looking for an exciting space adventure book, a romantic young adult story, and a fantastic sci-fi read? Get The Foundra by award-winning author Emmanuel M Arriaga today and prepare to feed your imagination with never-ending thrill ride.
I didn't even know that was a genre. I know I'm a huge fan of sci-fi, space opera, hardcore science fiction. My favorite books are the Bobbiverse and a few other stuff. But yeah, I never even thought of the romantic side of adding that to a science fiction book to be fun, or even have its own reward. Have a words are hard, to have a section of to be voted on and win. So that's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's typically a genre that a lot of publishers actually stay away from. Funny enough, because it kind of touches on two genres that it's one of the hardest genres to sell in, apparently.
The romance novel or the science fiction novel?
Sci-fi romance.
Oh,
yeah, it's one of the hardest genres to sell.
I can see that, because a lot of nerds are probably. I love my weaves and I love my nerds, but we're not always the best when it comes to romantic entanglings.
Yeah, and so a lot of literary agents, if you want to go that route, typically avoid sci-fi romances like the plague. We should probably stop using that terminology because clearly people do not avoid the plague like they should.
Controversial topic. Yeah, no, I mean, the plague is here. Oh, geez. Apparently there's another variant coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, we were talking about that at work. The consensus was like, this might be bad, but no one cares anymore. People just want to return to office and return to work, and did you hear? There's a variant, but there's no changes to any plans.
Yeah, well, New York's new mayor is like, we got to get everybody back to work, you lazy people. Like, remote work is here to stay, people. Remote work was on an uptick, I think, before COVID, and COVID just pushed it over the edge. I don't think a lot of cities realized how close, right?
Yeah. And so sci-fi romance, typically a genre people stay away from. Funny enough, a genre that's very popular is sci-fi erotica, which is a completely different type of book.
Well, I mean, is erotica... Well, okay, so that thing is... your book kind of has... Would it be considered some of that erotica, or is that not to that level? Because it did have some, like, description... at least, if I remember correctly, it did have some very descriptive scenes.
Yeah, but that's not a... So erotica book is written with the primary objective being characters hooking up.
Okay.
And so the story is based around hookups. Most of the action in the book is hookups, usually with many different people or many different characters. It is smut, pure and simple.
Right. So this might be considered a little controversial, but I was always curious, as since your faith is super important, like, how did you decide to add descriptive, intimate scenes in a book, right? Like, how did faith have an impact on the decision, or was that just something like, oh, you're okay with that? Like, I've been very curious, because I know, depending on where you are on the faith side, or the conservative, like super conservative side would be like, you should never ever do this, and then more on the liberal side would be like, it doesn't matter. But I was just always curious, because I think it's an interesting line, or an interesting... I didn't have a personal problem. Like, personally, I had no problem with it. I thought it worked with the character development, it worked with the story, it was interesting. But I'm curious, like, how did that decision come to add that, right, or to make it an adult book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted to present a novel from a realistic standpoint, right?
Adults are intimate? What?
Yeah, and so I think I wanted to show reality, as best as you can in a sci-fi novel. But I also want to show the positive and negative outcomes of that reality, right? And so I think one of the things you'll notice, especially with the characters that, some of the characters that are intimate, is that a lot of their relationships are shaky, right? And they have challenges, especially if their relationship started that way, right? And so, I think I tried to show a spread of relationships in the book. Ones where you had people who their relationships were built on different things. And for a lot of those characters, for like, if there was a couple, a good example is like NIEA and Marcus, right? So Marcus, the big Arclight, genetically engineered super soldier, right? So he's been married to NIEA for decades, right? And their relationship, they have a family, and they, military relationship, built on, commitment and being faithful while away, and all other stuff, and so they're, when they're together, you see a lot of love in their actions, but I don't have any intimate scenes between them because, I wanted to reflect that in those relationships. It's not, intimacy means more than just sex. Right. And so, there are no intimate scenes between NIEA and Marcus intentionally from that perspective, but they do have scenes where they are, there's other forms of intimacy, right? Like, flirting with each other and,
communication,
chivalrous and stuff like that, and and all other stuff. And that was intentional, right? As opposed to like Tashinir and Jinsu, right? Where it's just like, anytime they're together, it's usually sex, right? But that's like the basis of their relationship. And so they don't really have much else. And it really shows, it feels kind of hollow. And, and that's intentional, right? And there's a story arc that comes, in future novels, right, where it starts to play out in the sequel, and comes to a culmination in the third book that I'm working on right now, right? And so it's very intentional in how I treat the different relationships. Like Zun and Nevin, never have sex in the first book, in the normal sense, right? They definitely skirt the line many times, but they never do. And you see their relationship, develop in other ways. And they learn to be intimate in other ways, right? And so, I wanted to explore many different aspects of relationships and be realistic about it, and put my worldview in there too, in terms of how I view healthy relationships and what they're based off of, right? And so that's why
my question was going to be how did your faith like influence how you want to, like, because as someone of faith and someone of kind of wanting to, like, statistically weighting towards marriage is not standard in our culture, but that is more in the faith group. Did that affect, like, that you kind of want to use your platform to discuss the pros and cons, or like do you want to open a discussion with people, or just have people think about it internally?
I'm more so not trying to force my worldview on anyone from that perspective, but I definitely show Nevin, who struggles with trying to stay true, because that's his personal worldview, right? Mm-hmm. Throughout the entire book. And he fights very hard to, maintain that worldview in the real world. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's not easy, right? A lot of people, especially people who grow up with that worldview, when they hit the real world, right? Like a lot of times they struggle and break, out of that worldview, or, do things they regret because they, it's tough. Right. And so I wanted to represent that with Nevin, where, he has this worldview, that was instilled by his parents, and, and then he basically gets into this relationship where he's trying really hard to not have sex before marriage. And, Zun at one point kind of laughs at him because she doesn't believe him.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and so it's, because she definitely does not have the same worldview, right?
I remember correctly,
and so
she was married before, divorced, or her husband died. I forget. It's been a while since I read the book, so I apologize. I'm forgetting some of the details.
Yeah, her previous husband died. That's revealed near the beginning of the book. She was in a relationship with Yuvan, who died, in the opening scene of the book, when they're fighting this supervillain. I guess is the best way to describe him. It's a traumatic moment for her, because it was the first time that she had found, like love in her life, right? Like she had settled down with Yvonne, after a long life of avoiding committed relationships, right, but not necessarily avoiding sex, just avoiding committed relationships.
Right, because her character, her race, I think, lives super long, right?
Yeah, so she's half Husian, half human. And so Husian lives for about 1,000 years. A human lives for about 200 years in my story, in my universe. So half Husians, half humans live for about 500 or so years. And so she, she's up there. She's in her late 300s. She'd be the equivalent of, like, someone in their late, the mid to late 40s, mm-hmm. In today's, age. And so, she spends most of her life with flings and, uncommitted relationships. And then she, actually settles down for the first time with Yvonne, because she wants to actually, have a family. And, she's kind of post-career, she's, this is revealed more in the second novel, but, she had been hyper-career focused for most of her life. And she had been an incredibly successful, tech genius, right?
She was working on the military thing, right?
Huh?
She was working on the military base and creating I forget what it was.
She worked for the Mensi, which is not necessarily related to the military. It's the like a government run scientific research lab, but they pay their people, basically. They top a market, right? And so she had been a successful tech entrepreneur before she joined the Mensi, right? And so she's literally a multi-billionaire. That's revealed in the second novel. I was
just about to ask. I don't remember that being revealed in the first novel, and Nevin doesn't know.
No, no, it's an aspect that I explore more in the second novel. So she's a multi-billionaire, and she has immense wealth, and kind of goes along with her genius, right? She's created a lot of interesting technologies, and that it's revealed more about her, and that's actually a narrative in the second book where Nevin kind of realizes how much he doesn't know about her when she starts to reveal this aspect of her life, like letting him in more. And he suddenly realizes that, he's dating a multi-billionaire. And he's kind of afraid because it's, he doesn't want to be, it has O-level stressor, especially with the introduction of his mom or her mom, who thinks he's just out to get her money. Right. And so it's this interesting dynamic play out.
Do you intend to also go the direction, like money doesn't buy happiness type of thing, that it's just a tool?
It's interesting because I think from Zun's standpoint, she doesn't care about the money. She's more in it for the adventure, right? Like that's why she joins the Founders Elite with Lenret, right? Because she could live the rest of her life in luxury, but she doesn't value those things, right? Wealth has come to her because she's incredibly smart and entrepreneurial. She uses that wealth for her mom, right? Like for her family and friends back on Phi, which is the home world.
I'm assuming that's in the second book because I don't remember any of that in the first book.
Yeah, this is all in the second book. It's hinted at in the first book. So when they talk about the first assistant for Eknix, when they introduced the first assistant for Eknix, Atreus, Eknix makes a comment about, lining his pocket with Larids, which Larid is the currency in the Foundra Universe. And so, he makes this comment about, freely lining his pocket with Larids, because the chief assistant is highly paid, and so just in that role alone, you become a, multimillionaire, from being in that role for just a few years, right? And Zun was in that role for 50 years, so, from that alone, there's a lot of wealth that she amassed just being there, but she was already independently wealthy before she joined the Mensai, right? And so, just kind of plays into that. But yeah, so it was more so just, showing the different relationship dynamics, different social classes, because, one of the narratives throughout the first book and the second book is just the, income inequality and the challenges with, there still being poor people. And this is a huge narrative in the second book with the pirates and the Outer Rim, where, there's just this, this whole section of space where, extreme poverty is a thing, right? And it leads to people doing horrible things to survive, while you have multi-billionaires, running around, saving the universe, right? And so it kind of exposes that, some of the challenges that exist in society, with a sci-fi flair, right?
Similar to like the Belters in the Expanse series, right? Like mistreated, misused. Yeah,
I think it's different. Primarily because in the Outer Rim, like there's no value that they provide to the other galaxies or the other galactic empires, so they're ignored completely.
Which means they can't trade routes. They can't necessarily produce anything.
No, and they're basically run by these large pirate empires. Where you have these pirate bands that are very powerful, that have created their own version of society built on exploitation, slavery, and theft, right? And they maintain order through, that structure, right? And so it's a terrible environment to live in. And, there's an entire section of space which exists there. And it actually leads to the main character of Pride of Ashna, Sarah Elex, who's this character here. It's her story, right? She kind of, she's a Das Ven, who is this species in the Foundra Universe that are these peace-loving species that's focused on, building relationships and maintaining peace throughout the galaxy, right? So she comes from this background, except, her parents go to the Outer Rim to help people in the Outer Rim, and they end up, becoming victims to pirates, and she ends up losing half her family. it plays out that, she doesn't grow up in Dasvan society. She grows up in the Outer Rim society, and that influences her, who she is as a person. And she becomes a very vengeful warrior, which is counterculture to who the Dasvan are, right? And so it's an interesting dynamic because, I talk about the Dasvan a lot in the first book. I kind of introduce them as this majestic, peace-loving, wise species of technologically advanced people, who have no gender, but are viewed as female, but they're non-binary, and they end up, in the second book, actually, play with the concept of them being, one of the Dasvan growing up in being influenced by her society, being influenced by a completely different society that instills in her a set of values that are, contrary to, the vast majority of her populace, and actually, labels her as an outcast. It actually plays out, early on in the second book where, she's viewed as an outcast, or as someone who didn't grow up in Dasvan society, who could actually be a risk to, Dasvan principles, or
lifestyle.
They call them noiser, which is a term they specifically have for Dasvan outsiders, Dasvan who are not raised in Dasvan society, who haven't been socialized into Dasvan culture, principles, and values. And so they view those people as different from the rest of Dasvan, because they see them as corrupted, as different. And because they're different, they can't ever truly be part of Dasvan society, because they would bring conflict and harmony. And the Dasvan society is built around harmony. And so, it plays with that concept, just with Dasvan society and things like that. And so, that narrative of inequality and being influenced by our environment, is a core narrative theme throughout the second book.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this one, check out part 2 of today's episode on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Please subscribe to our podcast for more books and inspiring stories of today's authors.